Okay, everyone, this is our last lecture. We're going to be talking about the mammals. The extinction at the end of the Cretaceous signaled the dawn of a new radiation for mammals. These are alinosynapsids, you guys know what that means, dating back about older than 200 million years. Living mammals and reptiles are very different. There's no surviving intermediates to figure out the evolutionary patterns, so really all we can do is try and understand how they diverge based on differences that they have today. As far as mammals go, we know they're warm-blooded, along with adaptations such as hair to control heat loss and sweat glands to augment evaporation and cooling. There are many different characteristics that separate mammals from other critters. So the presence of mammary glands, which are nothing more than modified sweat glands, allow the mothers to provide nutrients for the young. And from an evolutionary perspective, this was huge because it allowed them to have more maternal care and provide protein and so forth, which was vital to the young survival. Now, I don't know if any of you are lactose intolerant. I have several good friends who are, but believe it or not, that used to be the dominant form as far as humans were concerned. Most people back in the day in evolutionary history were lactose intolerant. Now, eventually what happened is that humans kind of switched our lifestyle. We went from being hunters and gatherers, which is pretty nomadic, to being herders, okay, and farmers. And so by doing so, having the ability to break down milk and get protein and so forth is actually a really big evolutionary advantage. So in many different countries where agriculture and herding and so forth was big, there was a large selective push for humans that actually could use lactose and be able to digest it and get protein. So, however, I realize it gets frustrating if you're lactose intolerant and you can't consume ice cream and stuff like that. The good news is there's a lot better substitutes these days than there used to be. But if you are lactose intolerant, that was the dominant form back in the day. So many people throughout history were lactose intolerant as well. In addition to having mammary glands and digesting milk, a diaphragm allows us to increase inspiration of oxygen and expiration of carbon dioxide, which is necessary for high metabolic rates. We've also said before that having a four-chambered heart that completely separates oxygenated from deoxygenated blood has much greater physiologic potential because it's much more efficient, okay? And so mammals have this as well. Expansion of the neocortex was supposed to happen with humans. This is supposed to be a sign of greater intelligence, although, let's be honest, some days I wonder. Anyway, ideally, this is one of the things that also came with mammals and humans and so forth. Having an ear that is more sensitive to a range of vibrations also came about with mammals. And so the bone connected to the eardrum detached from the rigid jaw, joined three new bones, and became the middle ear, which was free to vibrate more easily, and this is what gives us the range of sound that we're able to hear. There were also some major changes in teeth. So dentition differentiated into two small incisors, large canines, complex premolars and molars, multi-rooted teeth with multi-cuspid crowns, interlocking teeth, and ultimately this improved chewing. The interlocking cusps of upper and lower teeth cannot be maintained if the teeth are continuously lost and replaced. So this led to the evolution of just two sets of teeth. One set replacing the other in the juvenile, the milk teeth and adult teeth. And also, in case you're curious, the tooth fairy happened to evolve at this time. So in addition to the tooth fairy, they had a mandible composed of one bone, known as the dentary, that articulates with the squamosal bone of the skull, and having that ability to come together like that, again, really improves the jaw function. Additionally, having a bony secondary palate that separates the nasal passage from the mouth, this was also a big improvement. And I don't know if you've ever swallowed anything and have it go down the wrong hole. My husband, I swear, has almost died twice on me doing that by swallowing things and having them go down the wrong hole. I can tell you your body doesn't like it, and you will cough violently until things get fixed. And it's not pleasant. So having that palate there is, a very big evolutionary advantage. And I'm very grateful for it personally. So having improved locomotion, and this is a change in limb posture from sprawling to erect with elbows pointing out and backward, knees pointing out and facing forward, the vertebral column would become more rigid, and a more rounded occipital condyle, that's the joint at the base of the cranium, would allow for more flexible head movement. All of these, as you can see, would be much better when it would come to hunting as well as getting away from predators. Now, the mammals would first appear in the late Triassic, somewhere around 208 to 220 million years ago. The transformation of the cyanodont therapsids into true mammals was gradual, and by the way, it wasn't like flipping a switch and these new features all appeared at once, okay? The first mammals were small and basically shrew-sized. The small mammal may have been successful because warm-bloodedness allowed it to live as a nocturnal insectivore. Remember, they were trying to get away from the dinosaurs. By the late Cretaceous, there were three main types of mammals. So there was the multituberculates, and all these guys are extinct now, the monotremes, and the therians. And we'll discuss each of these in the next few slides. So the multituberculates, these are known as a lost tribe of mammals. They get their name by having many cusps or tubercles arranged in rows in their teeth. They have 100 million year fossil history. And by the way, guys, that's the longest for any mammal. They range from the Jurassic to the early Oligocene with the appearance of true rodents. Now the monotremes lay eggs and they have one external opening called a cloaca through which all waste matter passes and reproduction occurs. The word happens to mean one opening, by the way. The modern-day duck-billed platypus and the spiny echidnas that live in Australia and New Guinea are the only living monotremes these days. Now the therian mammals, these guys would come about in the early Cretaceous. They would have improved inner ear for hearing. This would happen by coiling and enlarging of the cochlea bone in the inner ear. There are two types of therians, the marsupial, these are the pouched guys, and placentals. Both marsupials and placentals give birth to live young, but the marsupials have very immature newborns, and they usually place them into a pouch where they will grow and continue to mature there. Now, the placental or the eutherian mammals, there are nearly 4,000 species. They include such diverse forms as whales and bats and elephants and shrews and armadillos, and the placenta is derived from the same membranes, by the way, that surround the embryos and the amniotic egg of reptiles, birds, and monotreme mammals. The term placental mammals is a bit of a misnomer because marsupials also have a placentae, but it's temporary and doesn't make as much of a contribution to nourishment as it does in the placental mammals. By the way, we're placental mammals as well. The end of the Mesozoic and beginning of the Cenozoic era, the Tertiary period, and the Paleocene, all about 65 million years ago. This meant the extinction of the non-bird dinosauria. The small dinosaur niche would be occupied by the birds. Mass extinction in the oceans, we've said that. The crocs, the frogs, the salamanders, lizards, snakes, turtles, and many other critters would survive. I miss Steve Irwin. I don't know about all of you, but I thought he was pretty awesome. Now, there's about 8 to 10 families that survived, the mammals. They were all insectivores, small carnivores, or omnivores. Leptictidium, if I can find a video that I want to play for you guys, these guys are pretty awesome. They managed to eke out a pretty good living back in the day, but they did have to avoid the predators quite a bit. Now, the Paleocene epoch, about 65 to 54 million years ago, marks the beginning of the Cenozoic and the Tertiary period. So we had dense forests growing in the warm, damp, and temperate climate. Paleocene mammals were still generally small, and they didn't really exhibit all the characteristics of later forms. They weren't swift yet. They didn't have specialized teeth. For much of the epoch, the lizards, snakes, and the crocodiles were among the larger predators. It would take the mammals a while to ramp up. Now, during this time, before the Paleocene epoch's end, the giant predatory flightless birds like the Gastornis would become common in the northern hemisphere. They would rule the roost. Some would say that these guys were herbivores. Others would say that they were carnivores. I think it's going to be a while before this is settled. I like to think of them, I mentioned this earlier, as carnivores just because they're so cool looking. Now, by about 60 million years ago, this is when primates would finally make our fashionably late appearance. The first true primates were early prosimians. They evolved by the middle Paleocene and lived in trees in tropical or subtropical areas. They were still somewhat squirrel-like in their size and appearance, but they had grasping hands and feet, and they were pretty efficient at manipulating objects and climbing trees. About 57 million years ago, the rodents would make their appearance. They evolved initially in Asia and replaced the multituberculates that we talked about earlier. These were the small, gnawing herbivore guild. The rodents took over relatively rapidly, actually, which was quite a surprise. Now, the bats are one of my very favorite groups, and they would come about around 55 million years ago. They're the only mammals capable of sustained flight. They evolved from primitive insectivores and became one of the most diverse groups of mammals. Despite all of the horrible things that are going on right now, bats are awesome in my opinion. So these guys can eat anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000 mosquitoes a night. Anything that can consume that many parasites that make me miserable, hats off to them. If you guys want to see some bats, most of the time it's in the spring and summer and fall. If you go out at dusk and you see little critters flying around, and they don't look like they're flying like birds, they look like they're going after insects, those are the bats, and usually birds are settling in for the night by then. So if you guys are curious, I highly recommend going out at dusk. Of course, they don't want to land on you. They don't want to go anywhere near you, okay? They just want to do their feeding, and they do that by, the sonar, which is also makes them super awesome. But they're definitely fun to watch them feed, and as I said, I cheer them on as they're eating all of those mosquitoes. They're my heroes. Now, the Eocene epoch, which lasted from 54 to 37 million years ago, continents began moving closer and closer to present-day positions. Of course, this altered ocean and air circulation patterns, and by the end of the Eocene, temperatures had cooled considerably and a drying period commenced. This is the general trend of the Cenozoic era. In the subtropics, open woodlands of ferns and shrubby plants replaced the forests. Land mammals, which moved out of the forest and into open spaces, would become much larger. In the Eocene, the rhinoceros appeared, as did the four-toed horses or the Eohippus. Isn't it great when all this stuff ties back together? Early relative of pigs, the entelodonts, the camels, and the hippopotamuses also would evolve at this time. So we can't forget about our little dawn horses, even-toed horses, as they would evolve. Now, the entelodonts were somewhat of a cross between a pig and a tank. So these guys extended, basically stood about 7 feet tall. They had the brain the size of a fist. Not super smart, but they fought quite a bit, so I suspect they were angry little critters. And also suspect I would not have wanted to meet one anytime soon. Eventually our camels would evolve, and those that are closely related as well. Don't really know when they started spitting on humans, probably not long after they met them. However, realistically speaking, they are also interesting critters and came about during this time period. So let's talk about the evolution of whales. So when we ever get to go back into the exhibit museum again, you will see that they have a pretty awesome whale display. Whales evolved about 50 million years ago from an predatory even-toed hoofed land animal related to hippos and other seagoing creatures. Basically, mammals would return to the oceans, okay? And so then they would occupy land, air, and sea. As temperatures continued to cool, some groups would go extinct, especially in higher latitudes, and this would be one of the next mass extinction events. Also in the oceans at this time, we would have our Ambulocetus and Basilosaurus. These would be the largest predators back in the day, and I think we've touched on them before where we said there's a pretty good exhibit on them as well in the museum, which someday we'll get to go see again. Now, the Oligocene was relatively uneventful. This was 33 to 24 million years ago, both geologically and biologically. The climate would remain cool and seasonal. Animal life on land would basically evolve in place, not much migration. The early horses and other herbivores would feed primarily on woodland plants, and towards the end spread to grasses that would make their first appearance of 25 million years ago, which we talked about previously. Once again, it's pretty awesome that everything's tying all together, isn't it? Members of the raccoon and bear family, which initially resembled foxes, would split and evolve during this time period. The Andrecotheriums, which are relatives of modern rhinos, evolved into the largest land mammal of all time. And believe it or not, these guys were twice the height of an elephant. That's pretty amazing. Now, the hominoid primates that included the early human ancestors, as well as the great apes like the chimps, gorillas, and orangutans, and the lesser apes such as the gibbons and siamangs, also appeared by the late Oligocene, so about 25 million years ago. By the end of the Oligocene, about 24 million years ago, all major groups of mammals, so this is about 80 or so families, would become well established. Early in the Miocene epoch, which was about 24 to 5.3 million years ago, temperatures would begin to rise. Extensive mountain building in the Americas and Asia would alter the air circulation, and weather patterns would contribute to drier conditions overall. Antarctica's separation from South America, which began during the Oligocene, would inhibit the mixing of warm tropical waters with cool polar waters. Antarctica would begin to freeze, and the global climate would begin to cool again. So, in the cooler, drier conditions, grasslands would dominate. Many different artiodactyls and other hoofed mammals would respond to the challenge and undergo a period of rapid evolutionary change. The ancestors of horses, which first appeared in the Eocene, would grow considerably larger, and some now displayed a single toe on each limb instead of 3 or 4. Now, during the earlier Oligocene, certain groups would develop an advanced digestive system known as the rumen, and this now comes in handy as a pre-adaptation, which helps them deal with new grass food, which would source efficiently in the Miocene. So mammal diversity, in case you guys are curious, would reach its peak during the Miocene as well. In the seas, the kelp forest would arise for the first time about 20 million years ago. Whales, seals, and dugongs would flourish around this time too. Additionally, during this time, giant sharks would come about. So the Carcharodon megalodon, which is about 13 to 15 meters in length, would exist and prey upon the early whales. So remember the tongue stones of Nicholas Steno? This is where those teeth would be coming from. The Miocene was also a time of diversification for the great apes. In about 6 million years, the lineage leading to humans would separate from the chimpanzees. Now, the Pliocene world, which is about 5.3 to 1.8 million years ago, became much like today. Cooling continued, subtropical regions retreated equatorially, and ice caps formed. The Pliocene was a time of great migration due to new land bridges appearing. The North American three-toed Hipparion horse would cross the land-Bering Strait Bridge and enter Asia and Europe. Mastodons would also enter the Americas from Asia at this time. During the late Pliocene, about 3 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama would end South America's isolation. Armadillo, ground sloth, possums, and many birds were among the animals that migrated north from South America. In return, dogs, cats, bears, horses, mastodons, and other animals invade South America from the north. The migration from the north was catastrophic for many of the local South American animals, especially the big marsupial carnivores. Even today, over half South American mammals are descended from the northern species. In the Rift Valley of northeastern Africa, in the early Pliocene, the emerging savanna grassland and retreating forest caused some apes to come down from the trees and take up life in the ocean. Life in the open. And this would have been me, by the way. An erect posture allowed these creatures to watch for predators. I would have died in the trees. I'm not graceful enough. The erect posture would also free the hands for carrying things and making and using tools like sticks. This was a much more efficient form of long-distance locomotion and allowed for much better body cooling. The hominids would undergo irradiation with a number of lines of robust Australopithecines evolving and spreading through most of Africa. The large-brained Australopithecine Homo habilis would continue into the early Pleistocene, giving rise to Homo erectus and the common ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern man during the late Pleistocene to follow. So during the Pleistocene, about 1.8 to 0.1 million years ago, glaciers would repeatedly advance from the Arctic North over Europe and North America and then retreat. So these are pretty dramatic events, by the way, and the ice could be up to a mile thick in places. It would spread from Greenland over the Arctic Sea into northern Europe and into Canada. So this was no small thing. The glaciers would basically wipe out everything that got in their way. And if creatures weren't able to move ahead of it, then they were in trouble. There are several different potential triggers that started up the ice ages. Changing continental positions, which would affect the air and ocean circulation. Although, unlike the movie Day After Tomorrow, it's not going to happen in a day. Anyway, uplift of continental blocks, a reduction of CO2 in the atmosphere. Additionally, what are known as the Milankovitch cycles, which are changes in the Earth's orbit and tilt of the axis to the sun. This most likely had something to do with the ice ages as well. Now, the temperature changes would have a profound impact on life. Mammoths, rhinos, bison, reindeer, and musk oxen all evolved to have warm, woolly coats. They would have to have this to protect them from the frigid conditions. These new mammals fed on the small bushes and hardy grasses that tolerated cold in advance of the glaciers, and then the glacial retreats allowed for the temporary return of warm weather plants such as oak and beech trees, lush grasses and flowers, Those are known as the interglacial periods, and this would let species return to their old habitats from the south. Now, the hominid line continued to evolve during the Pleistocene from about 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. This is when anatomically modern humans would first appear. So, everybody came from Africa. We know this. All modern humans evolved and came from Africa. There's just a couple of different hypotheses as far as how this happened. The first is that they evolved as a new wave of migrants from Africa and replaced local species, or that there was some regional mixing with the locals and some interregional gene flow. Okay, so at this point in time, they're not exactly sure who replaced who with regards to the different species of humans. Many scientists think early humans had an adverse effect on other mammal species through hunting. As human populations expanded, that's definitely most likely true. By the end of the Pleistocene, nearly all large mammals were extinct, including woolly mammoths, giant wolves, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths, and one of the hypotheses is the overkill hypothesis, which suggests that basically humans ate themselves out of house and home. As we moved to new lands, we sort of ate everything along the way, which was not a good thing to be doing. So the end of the last major glacial epoch was about 11,000 years ago, and ecosystems would change dramatically following the Wisconsin glaciation. Forests would reestablish themselves over larger areas again, and the temperatures would warm up since about the last 15,000 years. Now, there is a hypothesis out there that if it weren't for humans, we would be heading into another ice age. And so we know now, though, that this is definitely does not seem to be the trend. We know that CO2 levels are increasing, and usually when that happens, temperature increases as well. It's really hard to figure out if this is all due to humans, if this is partially due to humans, or if this is due to humans at all, because really in order to test this, you'd have to have a control planet just like Earth with no humans. As far as we know, we don't have that yet. So your generation is going to have to figure out how to handle the changing temperatures, whatever the environments may be someday as things do change, and hopefully technology will play a good role in that and help you as well. So I hope you all enjoyed the class. I hope you enjoyed the lectures. I wish I could have met you all in person. If you're on campus in fall, stop by. My office is 3108 USB. I would love to meet you. I go into teaching because I enjoy interacting with you guys, and so this wasn't my preferred method to teach, but at least we did get to interact a bit this semester. So, and if you ever need anything, you guys know where to find me. Don't forget to fill out the course evaluation, please. I think I'll give you, I said, 5 extra credit points for doing so. Please keep it constructive. I always want to know how to make things better for you. I know being online is a bit awkward, but I am always wanting to know how to make the experience better for you guys. So you guys stay safe. If you need anything, let me know. And hopefully I can meet you in fall. Take care.